Welcome everyone to another edition of Drunk Agile. With me as always is Prateek Singh. My name is Daniel Vacanti. Unfortunately, we're still having contract issues with Nisha. She's but hey, she's gotta get what she can get, right?
She's demanding more treats per episode.
Yeah. So hey, and you know what? We're just gonna have to pay for it because we
Yeah.
know that none of you come to see us. You all come to see her, which is
Yep.
fair enough. Um, if you want to know what we were drinking and all that stuff, you can see the last video. It's kind of I don't want to say kind of, it is a continuation on of everything that we've
Yeah.
been talking about in the past video. So Pratik, kind of set us
Yeah.
up. Where are we
We
and what are we doing?
we we spent a lot of video kind of getting into the history and some of the math behind a control chart. Like what is a control chart? Where did it come from? What needs to be true for the data in order to draw a control chart? Those are nothing really, but and how did Stewart describe it? That's where we left off last time. That we covered all of that. Today we're gonna do a little more, take a little step forward, talk a little bit about process behavior charts, and also talk about maybe a control chart that you all are familiar with, something you all might have seen around some of the tools you use. So Dan, what do we want to talk about in terms of control charts and what people are familiar with?
Well, so yeah, I think I was going to say, I think that's where we start because
Yeah.
there is a particular tool in general that provides something called a control chart, and not to name any names, Jira, but if you use this specific tool, you will get out of the box a chart that this tool calls a control chart. They actually call it a control chart, and I believe it's only cycle time that is in this control chart. I don't know if you can
Yep.
get a control
Yep.
chart of throughput or work in
Only for
progress,
cycle time. Yep.
and it's yeah, it's only for cycle time. And if you got through all of the last video, you now know to be suspicious when somebody labels something a control chart without understanding any of the underlying math behind how that chart was created. You now know to be extremely, extremely suspicious. Now, the wonderful thing about this tool is they are actually, I shouldn't say, I guess it's kind of wonderful. They're actually fairly transparent about how
Mm-hmm.
this chart is created. That's both a really, really good thing and unfortunately for them, a really, really bad thing. So Prateek, can you start us off with helping us to understand, given how they explain what this chart is, why it is nowhere near anything what a control chart is intended to be?
The simplest way to understand that it's not a control chart, probably the simplest way, we're going to get into the other ways later on, is there are no control lines on this chart. There's no upper or lower control line on this chart at all. There's a shaded area, but that's not a control line. So the fact that it does not have an upper control limit and lower control limit just by itself tells you this is not a control chart. That's probably the simplest way to just see this.
And I'm just going to say one thing because I did way too much talking in the last episode, so I'm going to let Prateek do a lot more talking in this episode. Um, just so you know, this blue shaded area that Prateek is talking about is actually plus or minus. They tell you this. It is actually plus or minus one standard deviation. One standard, not one sigma, one standard deviation. Prateek, why why is that a problem and why does that tell us absolutely nothing about the data?
Even further, let me just add to that. It's one standard deviation on a rolling average. So as things are moving, it moves up and down. Um, let just I don't even know how to approach this
Take a
because
breath. Take a breath, Prateek.
let's make the assumption that your data is normally distributed. It's not. It just isn't. Your cycle data is not normally distributed. even in that case, the stuff that falls within one standard deviation. Remember when? Well, not remember. If you watched the previous episode, Dan drilled into this part of Walter Schur's looking to see 98 to 99% of the data within that control area. One standard deviation, Dan, if you could do the math for me, I think one standard deviation will give you 66% of the data.
68.7.
68.7%, yeah, 68.7% of the data, which means a lot of the things that fall outside of that blue shaded area are actually noise. But just looking at the chart, you will think it's signal. And again, it's from a rolling average. So as your data is changing, as the noise level is changing, it's incorporating more or less stuff based on that. So a lot of stuff that's actually noise gets categorized as signal. And sometimes, because your rolling average gets pulled up by signal, your signals get categorized as noise. So it completely defeats the whole purpose of finding out when the variance in your data is too much, when the variability in your data is too much, because there's absolutely no judgment you can make from one standard deviation distance from your rolling average. Okay, I
Now,
did that.
good job, but it's worse than that. The problem is everything that Prateek said is 100% true, but it's worse than that because they go on to say, if you read their documentation, they actually go on to say that if your blue band is really narrow, that's good. But if your blue band is really wide, that's bad, right? They actually say that in their documentation. And as if you were listening to Prateek, I was listening to Prateek, but if you're listening to him, all you're doing is characterizing noise. There's no such thing as a thin band, of noise being better than a wide band of noise. It's still all noise. You've quantitatively and even qualitatively haven't understood your data any better.
Yeah, I might be two whiskeys in, I don't know. But I don't know if I already said this, but the whole point of the control chart, if you watched the previous video, was to find out when the variability has become too much variability, when it's outside the bounds of normal. It, it's just mind-boggling that you'll call something a control chart when it gives you absolutely no indication of that. And worse, it's actually giving, if it does claim to give you an indication of that, it's giving you a bad indication of that.
Now, it's even worse than that, right? We're not done yet. We're not done with how bad this is.
It gets more worse.
it gets more worser, okay? Because Prateek, I don't know if I should ask you this if you are two whiskeys in. Prateek, what happens if you have greater than, what is it, greater than, I think, than 30 data points on your chart? Is that what it is? Is that the breakoff point, 30?
I don't remember.
Oh, sorry. If the maximum elapsed time value on the chart is less than 30, or sorry, is greater than 30 days. So if the maximum elapsed time is greater than 30 days, Prateek, what do they do with this chart? What do they do with it?
These words, they change the linear scale on the y-axis. Well, change the y-axis from being a linear scale to being a cube root power scale. I I don't know what that means, but yeah, it's the cube root power scale.
I mean, for me, that's I don't know. I don't know about anybody else out there in TV land, but for me, that's the funniest thing. Of all the scales that you could choose, why a cube root? Why? Why? Why?
And you know, maybe you had to make a choice. You made a choice. Fine, you made a choice.
But why not like logarithmic? Why not
Yeah. The problem with this, the huge problem with this, is since you're talking about cycle, and by the way, they're doing this cycle time. So since you're talking about cycle time data, um, 2 points that are the same distance apart towards the bottom of the chart versus 2 points that are the same distance apart towards the upper part of the chart. The lower points could mean there is a distance of 2 days between them, right? They're 2 days apart. If you go towards the top, it might mean 200 days, depending on how far this chart goes. So all of a sudden, the whole point of this, which is understanding variability, you really cannot understand it just by looking at this thing. You really cannot understand what is the variability in this process. How are these things spaced apart?
Yeah. And I was just thinking before we get hate mail, um, for my last comment. Yes, technically a cube root scale is logarithmic. I think technically, it is, but I'm saying why not a natural log? Why not log
Yeah,
10, right?
yeah,
Things that you would expect, and I want to make clear, I'm not saying that like a natural log or log 10 would be better. I think those would be just as ridiculous, just
yeah.
as random, just as arbitrary, just as stupid as, yes, I did say the S word, as a cube root. I mean, I would have loved to have been in that meeting, with the product owner when they decided, of all the scales we could make this thing. You know what?
Yeah.
You know what we're going to use? Cube root, Prateek. Cube root.
I,
That's now
I,
now with 3 times the cubeness.
I would not be surprised. I would not be surprised if they went with a square root scale first.
And 2 wasn't enough. And 2 wasn't enough.
And then they put the data on it, and I mean, you can see the progression of this. You can see, oh,
No,
this
no, I
stuff looks
can't. I
really
can't.
bunched. Because of this one outlier, everything else looks really bunched together. Let's do a square root scale, see if it gets closer. No, now let's do a cube root scale. Okay, that worked. Good thing we didn't have to go to the fourth root.
Yeah, that's for the next version of Jira. They're going to do the.
Yeah.
Okay, all right. So the point here. Sorry, was there anything else about the ridiculousness
No,
to
no,
start?
no, no. I
Yeah,
think we're
we
good.
probably should get off it pretty quickly. The point here is they are calling this thing a control chart, and it has absolutely nothing to do with at least anything that I have ever read or understood about a control chart. So just because you call something a control chart doesn't mean it is a control chart. Again, in the short tradition. Um, did you want to say anything else about that?
I'm sorry. I have the page up, and it looks like you can have active issues on the cycle time control chart.
Makes sense. Yeah, makes sense. Why not? Why not? More the merrier.
Yeah.
Doesn't the size of the dot mean something too, or something? Doesn't it mean?
No, I think it's a solid dot if it's a cluster of issues.
Oh,
It's
okay.
a it's if it's a single issue,
Yeah.
it's an empty
So,
dot, which I don't have a big problem with that.
right. Okay. So, okay. So rounding this out, if you're using Jira out of the box, you're like, hey, cool, I've got this great thing called a control chart. I'm sorry, hate to be the one to burst your bubble. You do not have this cool thing called a control chart. Well, I mean, it's called a control chart, but it's not a control chart. Any information you were getting that, as Prateek just mentioned, is at best dubious, and at worst, just flat out wrong. If you're taking action based on anything that you see here, you are probably, this gets back to Deming. We talked a little bit about Deming last time. If you're
Yeah,
taking any action based on what you're seeing off this control chart, you're probably making things worse rather than making things better. Why they have even chosen it's interesting. They've got something like this called a control chart in Jira, but we still can't group work in progress limits across columns or set a work in progress limit on the whole board. We can't do that, but we have a cube root scale for our control chart fatigue. This is why prioritization is so important. I don't know if you know. I don't know if you knew that. That's why. What else? Was there something else we want to talk about in this video other than
No,
just
I, I
we
just
bashed
I just
Jira?
discovered that they can I just discovered you can have active stuff on a
Yeah.
cycle time control chart, which I mean, as if this wasn't bad enough.
You should probably just minimize that page, Prateek. Yeah, stop
I
reading.
know, I just need to stop reading.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Put the mouse down, take 2 steps back. Yeah.
Yeah.
Uh,
We did not really get into process behavior charts, but I feel like we've spent enough time on this episode to kind of get too much into it.
yeah. Well,
Um,
I just want to say one thing about that. And this is getting back to the last episode, why nomenclature is so important. Um, if you do see something called a process behavior chart, there is a much better chance that these people have done their homework and they probably understand really what a process behavior chart is. But again, just because you have a tool, and any tools that Pratik and I might be affiliated with, I, you can lump those in this, into this comment. Just because a tool says that it has a process behavior chart, you will still want to question, how are they doing their calculations? What do these things mean? Because as we've just shown here, you cannot trust the title of a chart. You just can't. You're gonna have to do your own homework on this stuff. And I'm sorry to say that, but it's just the way it is. And I mean that for all charts, right? Whether somebody talks about Monte Carlo simulation or cycle time scatter plots or throughput run charts, whatever. You're going to want to do a little bit more investigation on yourself. Do this stuff yourself and see if you get the same answers. This is one of the things that actually, not to belabor the subject too much, this is one of the things that really got me, really put me off on Jira, is because when I was first, doing my cycle time calculations, I never, ever, ever got the same answer that Jira did. And to this day, I have no idea. No one has ever been able to explain to me how Jira calculates cycle time. If you get it to work for one dot on the chart, and I promise you, whatever formula you come up with one chart, you will be able to find another dot on your chart where that formula will not work. So no idea. Anyway, long story short, question. Just don't trust the title of the chart. Question how those calculations are done. And if the tool's not transparent, thank you, by the way, Atlassian, for being
yeah. No.
transparent. But if the tool's not transparent about that, then I think you need to question. You seriously need to question that what that tool is doing for you.
And I don't know if we have done this video already at some point, but maybe in the next one we'll talk a little bit about how a scatter plot is not a control chart, and why those two serve different purposes and can still be used
Right.
together.
Yep. And there are cases where a scatter plot might, for your uses, a scatter plot might be good enough, or the process behavior chart might be good enough. Maybe you need both, maybe you need one, maybe, whatever. I mean, but Pratik is exactly right. They serve different purposes. Depending on your context, you might be able to get away with just one. Pratik, I'm going to give you the final word if you have something final to
Yeah, I'm
say.
uh I'm not gonna read out the URL so people can go check it out themselves. But as Dan said, there is a Jira Cloud support has a page called View and Understand the Control Chart. If you are using that chart right now, please go read it. Just so even if you are using this thing, you understand what you're seeing. What even if you do want to continue using it, at least you understand what is it that you are actually seeing on this page. Um, I highly recommend you go read that page to get a better understanding of this.
For better or for worse, the Jira control chart is the whole reason I think we started Drunk Agile. Just to get together and complain about stuff while we're drinking. So at least we have that. At least we have that. So hopefully we'll see Nisha in the next video. We hope we get things resolved for her. But appreciate you, Spartacus, for standing in for her. Thank you, I guess, for that.
Just yeah,
He's there. He's like, yeah.
yeah. He's like, this is what Nisha does, right? This is
He's
what I
doing
need to do, right? And
he's doing his best. He's doing his best.
yeah,
So
yeah.
poor Prateek. My name is Daniel Vacanti. Thank you so much for watching, and we will see you in the next video. Good night, everyone.